If you're going to be on active duty in the United States Army, there's going to be a point in time where you're going to have to work for 24 hours straight. Of course, I'm talking about CQ or staff duty, and if you've never had the glorious pleasure of experiencing trying to stay awake for 24 hours and work for that time period, I want to be able to provide you with that information of what it's like in the United States Army, and that video starts right now. So there could be some times when you're on active duty in the United States Army where you're gonna have to work for 24 hours. And for those of you that are currently in the Army, you may know what I'm talking about. Of course, that's CQ or staff duty. And there possibly could be some other examples of just like a guard shift or some other kind of things where you have to pull this 24-hour shift. But the most common one that people are going to do on active duty is going to be that CQ or staff duty. You could possibly do this in the reserves and National Guard, but it probably doesn't really happen because you don't have like barracks and you don't have the same kind of structure like you have on active duty. So this is gonna be more applicable to like active duty individuals because active duty individuals will at some point in time have to do this. In fact, probably sometime throughout your career, you have to do it multiple times, right? You'd be pretty damn lucky to get through your entire career without having to do it a single time. I would be pretty impressed if you were able to pull that off. So how do you get said 24-hour duty? Well, usually it's worked somehow in the unit, right? There's different ways different units may work it. I'll give you an example of like a common way that units might kind of work it to decide who's got duty on what day. A typical way is you come out with some kind of roster, whether it's for CQ or staff duty, and I'll explain the difference between CQ and staff duty here in a minute, but usually you just have some kind of roster that'll come out, somebody will put it together. A common way I've seen is they'll go alphabetical order based on your last name. So if your last name starts with an A, you'll probably be coming up on it, pretty soon, and then it starts going in alphabetical order until they run out of names to the end of the month. And then at the following month after that, then they'll start wherever they left off at, and then continue on until they run out of names, and then circle back around, start all over again. That's a common way. Other units may have different ways of doing it, but that's a pretty common way I've seen it is it'll go in alphabetical order based on your last name, but rank does play a factor a little bit. Typically with CQ, that's usually like E1 through probably E5. E5 is pretty much kind of the limit for CQ. Occasionally they might have staff sergeants, E6, but more likely it's usually up to E5. Staff duty, however, that one would be more likely for still E1 on for like the runners, which I'll talk about those as well. But you also for NCO wise, it's more common for like E5, E6. You can have still staff duty as like an E7 or something along those lines, but that's usually like higher level staff duty. But I'll talk about those here in a minute and then it'll make a little bit better sense, hopefully. This video is sponsored by Aura because standing guard online is just as important as standing guard in the field or combat zone. Cybersecurity threats are real and they can put your identity and your family information at risk. If you're in the military, then you've likely done some of that training for identifying threats. Well, with Aura, you don't have to do it alone. Aura is your battle buddy in the digital war zone. This comprehensive online security platform offers intel and protection that you can count on. Aura consistently scans the web and the dark web looking for breaches of your social security number, email address, and financial details. Just like a recon before a mission, they identify threats before they hit. Aura provides advanced virus protection to keep your devices secure from malware plus a VPN to encrypt your internet connection on public Wi-Fi. Think of it as your secure comms no matter where you deploy. You probably have a lot of passwords to keep track of too. Aura's secure password manager helps you create and store strong, unique passwords for all of your online accounts. They even have an option for parents out there to enable parental control to block content or provide your child with a safe gaming environment to protect against cyberbullying. I have a link down in the description box that will allow you to start your free trial. When you visit aura.com/ChristopherChaos, you can get a 14-day free trial. So make sure you secure your online perimeter by using Aura, and thanks to Aura for sponsoring this video. So let me talk about the difference between CQ and staff duty. So CQ is for individuals at the barracks, right? Typically you'll have some soldiers that are at the barracks working at a desk of some sort for 24 hours to do a lot of different tasks. I'll talk about this task here in a little bit, but you'll have typically, some individuals that are there at the barracks, which is CQ. Staff duty is usually like the battalion area, the brigade area, the division area. There's all sorts of levels to staff duty, but that one is a little bit higher above CQ. But those individuals I was kind of briefly talking about were like you have like E7 type of rank individuals, those sergeant first class individuals. Those one people may end up have staff duty, but like at the division level. Not very common they'll have it at the lower level. They could possibly, but usually those individuals that do have to do staff duty, it's at the higher level like division or something like that. So before I talk about what you do on CQ compared to staff duty, let me talk about who is going to be on duty. Again, this one does, depend on the unit and how they want to structure, this duty type of thing to work staff duty or CQ type of thing. But I can give you like a common example of what you might see. With CQ inside the barracks, they could either have maybe just one soldier by themselves that has to sit there at the desk, but a common one I might see might be like an NCO, a non-commissioned officer, like an E5, right? That will be the person in charge of the soldiers, and then they'll have maybe one runner or maybe two runners. So the runners are usually E4 and below soldiers. So in the example of you have an NCO and one or two runners, the purpose of that is that way they can easily rotate to be able to go get food or do some set tasks that they have to do and still have coverage at that desk. But there are times I've seen where they simply just have one soldier that could be a E1, an E4, maybe an E5 that is by themselves sitting at that desk and has to do all their duties by themselves alone. Staff duty is similar, but it probably would not be very common that you would see one soldier on staff duty. Maybe, but I don't think I've ever seen that. But more commonly with staff duty, it's going to be a non-commissioned officer that's kind of like in charge of that staff duty, and then one or two runners that are E4 and below. That NCO is typically an E6, but there's a lot of times where they'll have an E5 be in that kind of position if that E5 is promotable or got a lot of experience, whatever the case is, or really desperate, they don't have enough E6s, and so they just have to throw E5s in there. But typically they want usually a higher ranking NCO to be on staff duty because that's around a lot of the brass, around the sergeant major, around the commander for that unit, for that battalion commander, and all sorts of other individuals that are high ranking. So they typically want someone with a little bit more experience to be in charge at staff duty compared to like CQ. So when does this take place? Well, again, that also kind of depends on the unit. Usually you have a specific start time in the morning. It might be 07 in the morning, might be 09 in the morning, right? Whatever that unit has kind of set where you have to show up. You typically are supposed to show up, 10, 15, 20 minutes prior so you can get a briefing from the individuals there to find out what happened on the previous day, if there's important things you need to know about for the current day and all that kind of fun stuff. And, and then start your shift that will go for 24 hours and end the next day at the same time you started. So if you started at 0700 hours, then it goes all the way through the day into the night and then ends at 07 the next day when your replacement comes to take over for you. Hopefully the unit that you're in does it to where you don't do physical fitness first, then go to do CQ and then get off, because I've seen some units where they'll have it where CQ doesn't start until 09, so then the soldier still has to be at PT in the morning at 6:30. So now they do PT, they go eat breakfast, they show up for CQ or staff duty, work 24 hours from that period, which usually equals more than 24 hours because they were awake prior to that to do PT. A better scenario that I've usually seen is where they'll usually start CQ or staff duty at 07. So then they still show up for 06:30 accountability to make sure, we got the people there and they're going to be there to replace these other people that are currently on CQ or staff duty, and just accountability, basically accountability at the unit type of thing. And then they won't have to do physical fitness. They'll just leave to, maybe hang out for a little bit or go ahead and head on over to go relieve those other individuals early or whatever, and then start their duty. So that way they're not having to be up for more than 24 hours. But again, that depends on the unit. Now, this duty is 24/7, 7 days a week. It doesn't matter if it's Saturday, if it's a holiday, it doesn't matter. These duties still have to continue, all right? If the unit is taken off on like block leave, where like a lot of soldiers go on vacation and go home or whatever they want to do, there's typically some people that still stay behind, and those people get stuck having to rotate through and continue doing CQ and staff duty. And depending on how many people there is, depends on how long they have a break in between. And I've seen it sometimes where there's not that many people on rear D that are staying behind from this block leave. And so it ends up being like day on, day off, day on, day off of CQ until block leave is over. So now what do you do on CQ and staff duty? Well, CQ, its primary purpose is to kind of like, sort of be like on guard duty in the barracks in a certain way. It's really just to have somebody there to make sure that, hey, if something goes down in the barracks, right, the building catches on fire, someone shoots up the barracks for whatever crazy reason, some soldiers in the barracks start fighting with each other, or something else, you've got somebody there that can respond to that. They can call for the MPs, call for leadership, at the unit, to call the first sergeant, call somebody and let them know, hey, some crap's going down. They're also there to try to look after the soldiers too, because typically you have to kind of rotate around through the barracks and make sure, hey, maybe doors are locked, nobody's leaving the door unlocked, maybe, you don't have anybody passed out in the hallway because they got too wasted, and take care of that individual, or make sure that, people aren't doing things they're not supposed to be doing in the barracks. All sorts of duties you'll have to do inside the barracks. That individual is also usually kind of in charge of visitors, because typically barracks have a visitors policy. That will vary also by the unit too, but if they have a deadline to where barracks visitors are not supposed to be in the barracks past a certain time, they're supposed to be keeping track of who's in the barracks and then keeping track of who has left the barracks. And if that person has not yet left the barracks, then they have to go usually check on that room to see if that visitor is still there, and if so, kick them out. I don't know if I've heard of any stories yet of any soldiers saying that their barracks are really cool and they don't have a visitor policy as far as when they get kicked out or type of thing, and they're allowed to stay overnight. If so, cool, that's great, but most units I know of, they usually have some kind of time limit as far as how long you're allowed to have visitors for, and then after a certain time they have to leave. So the CQ, that usually kind of falls in their kind of lap as far as their responsibilities to make sure that visitors are checking in with them, checking out with them, and not staying overnight if that's not a policy that's allowed in the barracks. Staff duty is a little bit kind of at a higher level, right? That's usually at the battalion, the brigade, something along those lines type of thing, where you're sitting at a desk in the main building where the sergeant major has his office or her office, the battalion or brigade commander, whoever, has their office, the executive officer, the XO, you have all sorts of higher ranking individuals, the staff that are working in there. And so you're there with all of them, sitting at usually a main lobby desk type of thing, answering phones, and then you also have some tasks to do as well. Part of their task, usually as the non-commissioned officer's task, is to go check up on the barracks, right? If you are at that level, you typically have a certain time or time frame where you go and check up on the barracks to see if the CQ is still awake, see if the CQ is doing their job, and all that kind of stuff. You'll have to possibly go check on the motor pool, make sure the motor pool is locked at night, to go check on some other offices, make sure those offices are locked up at night. They could also have the task of, having the staff duty van or vehicle to where, let's say it's the weekend and some soldiers got hammered downtown and they don't have a way to get home or whatever, or back to the barracks, then possibly, depending on the local policy, they may be able to call the staff duty and be like, hey, can you come pick us up? Can you come give us a ride back to the barracks? We don't have a ride back and we don't want to drive and get busted. So they'll possibly go and come pick you up and bring you back to the barracks. There's a lot of other roles here and there for both CQ and staff duty, but those are just to highlight some of the bulk of the roles that you'll have to do. Mainly it's answering phones and doing some tasks here that mainly kind of relate to security in ways. They will have opportunity to take breaks, especially for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Especially if you have, that non-commissioned officer with a couple of runners or one runner, then maybe you take turns, right? Hey, you go take off for an hour, go get something to eat, whether it's at the chow hall, at Burger King, whatever you wanted to go do, right? Take an hour, go get something to eat, come back. When you come back, I'm gonna take off for an hour to go get something to eat. And you'll usually rotate in that way. In some of those cases where you maybe only have one soldier there, then they might do something where somebody else got tasked to have to take over the desk for that hour for them to take a break, or they may not care and they're like, okay, just during that time frame, there's not going to be anybody there. I guess it depends on the unit. There's actually not a lot of times I actually seen it where it's a soldier by itself, but it does sometimes happen. But they usually have their own way of working it when it is in that case, and allow them to still be able to go get that breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or take a break or whatever they need to do to go stretch their legs or go grab some snacks from the PX or the shop bed or something. Now, technically, for the most part, you usually can't sleep while on duty. There is a memorandum that did come out from one unit, and I did a video on this, where they are actually trying to enforce soldiers to get some rest at least 4 hours during the evening of their shift, so that way they're not having to be awake for the entire 24 hours and then have to drive home and be unsafe. But outside of that memorandum, that specific unit, a lot of units, they still have to you have to be up for 24 hours. And technically they'll say that, you can't sleep. You can kind of get around that because technically, like if you have like a non-commissioned officer that's in charge and maybe like one other soldier or two other soldiers, they might work something internally. Hey, go take off, go take a little hour nap, whatever, in your car, in your barracks or whatever, but set an alarm so you can be back here, whatever, or I'll come wake you up, whatever, and give a little bit of time for some rest, and they'll kind of swap out and take turns, especially in the late hours when really not much is going on, where everybody's probably asleep. But outside of working something out internally, usually there's no policy, with the exception of that unit that I've seen so far, that has actual policy of requiring at least 4 hours, during the nighttime hours to get some rest. Other units may have something, and I just haven't heard about it. But nonetheless, a lot of units, especially in the past and even still currently today, just expect you to stay awake for 24 hours. Now, after that duty is done, the way it is supposed to work, you could have some crappy leadership that doesn't do it this way, but how it's supposed to work is, let's say you get off at 07 the next day. Well, once you've been relieved and you get off, you are free to go home, go back to the barracks, sleep for the rest of the day, whatever you got to do, and then the following day be back. So if you had CQ, let's say Monday, and then you went through the night into Monday night into Tuesday, you got relieved at 07 on Tuesday, then you would have the rest of Tuesday to sleep, and then Wednesday have to be back at whatever time you're supposed to be at work, whether that's 6:30 for formation, for PT, or whatever the case might be. It does work out really nicely if you have CQ on Thursday, because then you have Thursday to do duty, Friday you get off in the morning, and then have the rest of Friday to sleep, and then Saturday, Sunday, and it kind of feels like a 3-day weekend. Probably even better when you have it where there's like a holiday on Monday. Friday was what's called a DONSA, day of non-scheduled activity, which gives you a 4-day weekend, but you had CQ or staff duty on Wednesday, so then you did CQ or staff duty Wednesday, off on Thursday to kind of sleep and kind of recover, and then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. Monday is a holiday, so you're off that day too, and that works out amazing. Probably the worst day to have it, I would say Saturday, right? Because you had to work all day Friday. Saturday you had to come in to start your shift in the morning, and then Sunday gets partially wasted by you trying to recover and sleep. And then it's back to work on Monday, and it feels like you didn't even get a weekend. So that, in my opinion, and probably a lot of people agree with me, the worst day to have CQ is Saturday. Now, how often will you get it? Well, that really just depends, right? It depends on how many people are in your unit, how they kind of structurize it to be able to, rotate those individuals, right? If you are doing it alphabetically and there's a lot of people in your unit, then it may take a while to get back around to you to have staff duty or CQ again. But if there's not a lot of people in your unit, and that's something you do at that unit where you have a staff duty desk you have to man, or you have some CQ to man at the barracks, and then it may come back around quicker. So it really can vary, right? I've had it many times, depending on what's going on, where maybe I got stuck with CQ or staff duty twice in a month, maybe once a month, and then, maybe I have it in 1 month, but then I don't have it again for like 3, 4, 5 months down the road, and then I come back up on the roster. So that definitely depends on the size of your unit, how many people are available to be able to pull this shift, to determine how long it's going to take for you to come back around in that cycle. I have had it before where I was on rear D and I had to kind of cycle through doing it quite often. I was doing staff duty. I was NCOIC for staff duty, and I had it where I was on rear D, and I think I had to do 3 times in a week or something like that. I think I had it on Monday, but then I was off on, Tuesday, and then Wednesday I was doing normal work, but then Thursday I had the shift and then come back or whatever, right? I've had it before during those times, on rear D, where maybe I had it 3 times, 2 times during a week. But that's usually the only time I usually would have to do it that often. Otherwise, there usually was a pretty good gap in between. For my veterans out there, I'm sure you have some great, amazing stories of something that happened or whatever during CQ or staff duty, and if so, I want to hear your stories. Down in the comment section down below, let me know some crazy, wild things that you saw while on CQ or staff duty, especially probably in the barracks. You might have some opportunities where you saw some pretty wild stuff that soldiers were doing in the middle of the night, and you had to tell them to chill out or whatever the case was. Those of you that have not yet experienced CQ or staff duty, let me know in the comment section down below if you got any questions, or maybe some stories you've heard from some of your friends that have been veterans or were in the Army or something along those lines. So leave me some comments, especially for the algorithm purposes, right? Comment something, right? Maybe tell me a fun fact, all right? I like to read fun facts, especially if they're pointless fun facts, about like a movie that really doesn't make me any smarter. It's just a cool, useless thing that's cool to know. I don't know. Algorithm purposes, at least, drop me a comment. You made it this far in this video. Make sure you're commenting. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out. Make sure to hit that thumbs up. You better be subscribed, or I will find you. I will find you and I will make you hit that subscribe button. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. I'm Christopher Chaos. I'll see you next time. See ya.